Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back to Chapter 22. We're talking about lungs. This shows a cross-section of how a lung works. This is showing the skin, the body of the animal. This is showing the lung inside. We see the same basic system as what we saw with the integumentary exchange. Deoxygenated blood comes up to the place where the air is. This time it's inside the lungs. Carbon dioxide goes from this bad blood into the air. Oxygen goes from the air and into the blood, and now good oxygenated blood is going to go off to supply the rest of the animal. In the last video, we talked a little bit about bird lungs. Let me show you how bird lungs work. They're really strange. All right, so I've got my bird. Okay, there's my bird. The way birds breathe is significantly different from everything else. When a bird breathes, the air comes in like anybody else, and it goes down their windpipe like anybody else. The air will go into a set of air sacs, and it's called the posterior air sacs. The air goes into these air sacs that have nothing to do with gas exchange. When the bird breathes out, I breathe in, bring in oxygen, breathe out. All right, that was the same air. The bird breathes in, that air goes into those air sacs. When they breathe out, the air that's in the air sac is going to move into the lungs. It's going to go through and go through the lungs. When the bird breathes in again, it brings in fresh air, and the air that was in the lungs moves into the front air sac. And then they breathe out the second time, and they breathe out that air that they breathed in 2 breaths ago. So the bird breathes in batch of air A, and it goes into those back air sacs. And they breathe out, and batch of air A moves through the lungs, and then they breathe in again, and the air in the lungs moves to the front air sacs. Batch of air A moves into the front air sacs, while batch of air B is now in the back air sacs. They breathe out a second time. That batch of air A goes out, while batch of air B moves into the lungs. Birds breathe really weird. But the reason is because of how their lungs are set up, and what this does is it actually makes it so they have a one-way flow of air through the lungs, and what this does is it makes their lungs way more efficient. And why do their lungs have to be so efficient? Because what do birds do? They fly. You've heard of geese being hit by airplanes, like thousands of feet up in the air. What happens to the air the higher up you go? The air gets less dense, which means for any volume of air you bring in, there's less oxygen. So how are they doing this really energy-demanding activity, flying in a place where there's less oxygen? By having really, really, really efficient lungs. The way everything else breathes, and when I say breathe, when I say everything else, we're talking about amphibians and reptiles and mammals. The way we breathe is using this 4-step process. The first one is breathing in. I bring in fresh air. That's step 1, called pulmonary ventilation. The oxygen in that fresh air goes from the air chambers in my lungs into the blood in my lungs. That's called external respiration. Then, the blood in my lungs has to carry this good, fresh, oxygenated blood to my body. And so that's called transport of respiratory gases. Once this good oxygenated blood makes it to my tissues, now the oxygen in the blood has to go into the tissues. And I know that sounds dumb. It's like, well, you said it just went to the tissues. I said it was taken to the tissues. It hasn't gone into them yet. It's very much like, when you come home, you went grocery shopping, right? You went to the store, and you picked up the groceries, and you got home. Well, now what do you need to do? You've got to unload the car. That's called internal respiration. When the air goes from the blood into your tissues. And that's when it feeds your cells so they can use that oxygen to do cellular respiration. Well, now I've got to do the process in reverse, right? After I've unloaded all of my fresh groceries, well, now, because it's Saturday, I'm going to gather up all of my trash that I have, and I have to carry it back out to my car. Going from the house to the car is internal respiration. Car to the house, house to the car is the same process, internal respiration. The cells will dump off carbon dioxide into the blood. Now you've got to carry that carbon dioxide to the place where you get rid of it. I've got to drive the trash that's in the back of my truck, I've got to take it to the dump. I get to the dump, and now that I'm at the dump, what do I need to do? What I need to do is I need to transfer the trash from my car into the garbage truck, or rather, into the dumpster. Oxygen goes into the cells, internal respiration. The cells dump carbon dioxide into the blood. Internal respiration. Once in the blood, the carbon dioxide gets carried to the lungs. That's transported respiratory gases. Once these carbon dioxide loaded blood gets to the lungs, I've got to unload it. The carbon dioxide has to go from the blood into the air in my lungs. External respiration. And then I have to breathe out. Pulmonary ventilation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. Going out that way is carrying oxygen. Coming back this way is bringing carbon dioxide. And here's that picture again. Step 1, pulmonary ventilation. Step 2 is getting oxygen from the lungs to the blood. Step 3 is carrying the oxygen to the body. Step 4 is dumping the oxygen from the blood and to feed the cells. Now I go backwards. Step 4 is carrying carbon dioxide back into the blood. The blood then carries the carbon dioxide to the lungs. The carbon dioxide has to go from the lungs to the air in my lungs, from the blood in my lungs to the air in my lungs. And then I can breathe that carbon dioxide air out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1. The process of breathing. There are 2 different zones within your respiratory system. Look, the easiest one to talk about is the respiratory zone, and those are those tiniest of balloons that we talked about. We said in your lungs you got these tiny little balloons, and these little balloons inflate with air. On the back side of those little balloons are a cobweb of arteries and veins, capillaries actually. A cobweb of tiny blood vessels that are going to do the physical picking up and dropping off of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Those tiny little blood vessels are going to pull oxygen from the air in the balloon and then dump carbon dioxide from the blood. They're going to dump that carbon dioxide back into the air in the balloon. That area, those little balloons, are called the respiratory zone. These are the places where gas exchange actually occurs. And those tiny little balloons are called alveoli. One balloon is an alveolus. Many balloons are alveoli. Everything else from the pipe that leads to the balloon to your nose is called the conducting zone. And the conducting zone conducts the air from the outside to the inside. The conducting zone isn't 100% passive. It does actually do some things. One of the things that it does is it cleans the air. The first thing it does is it cleans the air. Why do you have hair in your nose? The reason you have hair in your nose is to basically be a filter. The reason why we have mucus, boogers, and hair in our nose is so that the mucus slathered hairs will be a physical barrier that this dirty air has to go through. When I say dirty air, I mean pollen, soot, dust, any kind of floating particulate matter. You've all sat at some point in a chair next to a window at about 5 o'clock in the evening. And the way the sun shines in through that window, what can you see in the air? You can see all the tiny little stuff floating in the air. Is that stuff only there at 5 o'clock in the evening? When is that stuff there? It's always there. So if that trash is always in the air, that trash is always going in you. And so that's the job of the hair in your nose and the mucus in your respiratory system to catch that trash. So the first thing it does is it cleans the air. The next thing that it does is it's going to humidify the air. It humidifies the air because the humidity in your lungs is always 100%. We said that already. There's a fine layer of water that lines all of those tiny balloons, all of those tiny alveoli. And why is there water in there? There's water in there because blood has to take oxygen from water. It can't take it from air. So the oxygen has to dissolve into the water first, and then from the water it can go to the blood. And the last thing it does is it warms the air. Now again, I understand that it is late June, and we live in middle Georgia, so warming the air is typically not a problem here. But there are lots of places around the country, lots of places around the world where, yeah, you do have to warm that incoming air. I don't think I can describe to you what breathing 20 degrees below zero air is. It is so cold, you can feel the inside of your nose freezing. It is really cold, and you've got to warm up that air because those alveoli have super thin skins. And because they have super thin skins, they're easily damaged. So you have to clean, warm, and humidify this air to keep from killing your alveoli. That's the job of the conducting zone.